Hi, Jack. Welcome to That Will Never Work. I'm kind of excited about this one because you are actually a master of a category I'm trying to figure out myself, which is one of the reasons I get so much out of these conversations. But I think the best way to start actually would be for you to kind of just to tell people what are you working on, what do you do, and then maybe you can figure out a way to naturally segue into what you may want to talk about today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I run a studio called Disrupt, and we're a multimedia content studio. So right now our primary focus is releasing, I'd say, like free mini documentaries on YouTube. And our revenue primarily comes from that platform. So automated Google advertisements that are placed in the ads itself, or the videos itself rather. And we also add on brand integrations, merch sales, and an off-site streaming platform that viewers can subscribe to. So I would say like the main hurdle that I'm trying to work through, and I'd love your input on, is with the nature of building a business off of Google advertisements, the revenue seems to fluctuate very rapidly month to month, kind of based on video performance, algorithms. So my question is how would one handle revenue that is so unstable every 30 days?
Well, let's back up a little bit just to make sure I understand what's going on here, and people who are listening perhaps figure out what's going on here. So, is it safe to simplify it and say you have a YouTube channel? Is that the simplest way to think about it, or is this a different category? Is this more complicated than that?
Yeah, that's how I'd describe it.
But it sounds like you release these mini features. How frequently?
About 2 times a month.
So, was that 2 or 3? I didn't hear it clearly.
2 times per month.
Okay, so 24 per year. So every 2 weeks or so, a new one comes out, and then you get compensated not directly by YouTube for traffic generation, but based on the advertising that Google places alongside your video, proportionate to how many times it gets shown.
That's correct.
I'm sorry, I'm just thinking for a second. How long are the videos?
They range anywhere from 7 minutes to 30 minutes.
And have you experimented with different lengths, different release frequencies? Is 2 per month about all you can possibly do? Or have you kind of honed in on that's some optimized way for handling the algorithm?
Yeah, so that's, I would say, where my current capabilities and the small team that we have working on it, that's our current limit. But there's no...
How many of these you could do, in other words?
That's correct. But there's
so I'm certainly not a YouTube expert, and if anyone looks at my YouTube channel, they would know that in about a second. So it's with tremendous hesitance that I even want to comment on this at all. But is there the YouTube ecosystem? Has it evolved that there's some people who post super frequently and they make it work? Some people, but they get fewer views per piece of content. Some who, in fact, post less frequently than you, but make it work by having way more views. In other words, is this one of those things where people are trying to fill all these individual niches? Is there a best practice? And the only reason I mention that is, of course, the only ones that I really know of are the people who are on a very high posting frequency.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's definitely a mix. I think there are certain channels that have the ability to release high frequency videos, whether it be a few times a week, maybe every day. And I would say they have more of a stable viewership. And then there's other channels that I would imagine we fall more into line with, which is maybe higher quality or higher length videos, but release less frequently.
So your question is, has a couple of dimensions to it. One way of answering it is basically how do you make it work with YouTube and with Google to smooth out the revenue? And of course, you probably know the answer to that way better than I do. And so I'm gathering that you're really trying to figure out, how do I get out of Google's clutches? How do I begin to build revenue streams that are independent of the number of views that I may happen to get on YouTube? Is that kind of what you're really kind of curious about here?
Yeah, that's definitely one dimension of it. It seems fairly stable. I'd say the other half of that would be how to actually manage the cash flow when 1 month I can cover expenses and have some left over, and another month we're just scraping. Yeah.
Well, that one is certainly a straightforward one. I mean, how long have you been doing this for?
2 years full time.
So you have basically 24 months of 24 months of history of what your volume is. Are you worried that all of a sudden it's going to go back to zero, or is it just that? I mean, to what? Listen, lots and lots and lots of companies have erratic cash flows. I mean, for example, I do a fair amount of work with, a clothing brand. Well, I'll tell you, it's Chubby's, which is the which makes shorts dominantly. Of course, they make all kinds of other clothing too, but dominantly shorts, dominantly bathing suits. And as you can imagine, what a surprise! They sell a ton more in the spring and the early summer than they happen to sell in November. And yes, they do spend a little bit of time thinking about how do we generate more revenue in the third and fourth quarter than we do in the first. And so we're not as dependent on what happens in the first and second quarter. But the other way is they've kind of reconciled themselves to the fact that they happen to have a seasonal brand. And what they've done is devised, first of all, a comfort with the fact that they're going to have huge variations in revenue and cash flow from quarter to quarter, as well as designed a whole operating system that says we can't afford, we have to be very, very careful about how we do full-time employees, because if we hired enough full-time people to handle the peaks in Q1 and Q2, we have people sitting on their hands in Q3 and Q4. And, it's that old expression, and they probably don't even use that anymore, but then the expression used to be, you don't want to build the phone system for Mother's Day. Of course, Mother's Day being supposedly the peak phone demand day of the whole year. And you don't want to scale out the infrastructure for that one day, because then most of it sits vacant for the great majority of the year. So in other words, one way to approach your problem is to basically do what I was trying to do right before the call, which is just calm and accept. In other words, recognize the fact that you can't predict the algorithm. You can't predict which of yours is going to be a hit, because it's not dependent necessarily on quality, but it's dependent on factors far beyond your control, and that you're going to have some that go shooting way up and generate great cash flow, and then some ones that are way down. And you just have to say, that is the way it is. And I have to begin thinking about what is my annual revenue and divide that into 12 equal pieces and say that's what I could afford to spend. And in terms of allocating your physical infrastructure, recognizing I have to do things which allow me to basically be like oh boy, this is going to be a crazy analogy. I've watched too many nature documentaries. One of those little brine shrimp which live in the desert, where when it doesn't rain, that's no problem. They just dry themselves up and they manage to hunker down with no moisture for months at a time. And then as soon as it rains again, boom, they spring forth and become highly productive again. So this is probably not necessarily giving you a satisfactory answer, because it's so obvious. But it certainly is one thing to do, is that have some confidence that you're going to have a reasonable hit rate, that you're going to get it right. You're going to have a big hit 1 out of every 4, and you're going to have a moderate one 2 out of the second one, and the other 2 are going to be mediocre to poor. And just budget yourself accordingly. But maybe there's a way we can talk about to say, how do you build a business that's less dependent on these peaks and valleys? When I was getting ready to come on the call with you, I went back and listened to the voicemail that you left me. And I think you alluded to a whole bunch of other channels of revenue. You want to run through some of those for me?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first one would be brand integrations. So a company will reach out and request that we create, say, like a 30 to 40 second advertisement within our content. The second one would be merchandise sales. So t-shirts, posters that are sold off-site. And the last one would be a streaming platform similar to Patreon, where viewers can pay a monthly subscription and get access to behind the scenes or exclusive content.
And how are those doing?
They're good. I'd say cumulative total is about 15% of revenue.
The Patreon-like product, is there a market for subscriber video content at that level? Is this a common thing? Do a lot of content creators use something like that? It's like OnlyFans for video, so to speak.
Yeah, definitely. I think Patreon.
Well, I guess OnlyFans is for video, but I mean.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are you doing it on Patreon?
No, we're building we built a separate website.
Of your own?
Correct.
Interesting. Yeah, it seems to be, again, I'm not fluent necessarily in that category. It would seem that would be a fairly interesting space. And you may not know the answer. There's certainly a new, there's a site, oh gosh, I'm going to go crazy. My memory's failing me. There's one which right now, for people who are newsletter publishers or bloggers, subscription platforms, which have become extremely successful as a way to monetize blog content or newsletter content. So much so that that people are basically walking away from saying, why am I trying to do this on my own? And saying, I can do this as a subscription, letting someone else handle the billing, letting someone else handle all that infrastructure piece, and all I have to do is A, create the content, and then B, figure out some way to attract and retain people who want to see it. What happens have you tried going cross-platform, where you're releasing things on multiple platforms simultaneously? Or is YouTube pretty much the best place for that length or that subject that you're working on?
No, I haven't tried it. I'm not opposed to it. I think my focus has just been on YouTube.
Yeah, I guess here's the thing. Here's the thought then. I would agree with you. It would be terrifying to be building a business upon a platform which you have almost no control over. And I feel for content creators who are basically becoming brand famous on places like, certainly on Instagram or on Facebook or on YouTube, because although you're creating followers, you never really own those followers. YouTube owns those followers, and Instagram owns those followers, and Facebook owns those followers, and they're going through a very, very established business model where they try and attract as many users as they can using your content to attract people, and then beginning to charge you for access to your own followers. Or even worse, in your case, being capricious about where they choose to allocate views. It's what makes, in some ways, some of the newer platforms interesting, because they're still allowing for organic growth. It's not yet pay to play. I mean, TikTok in some ways is like that. Clubhouse is certainly like that. But wow, again, going back to Chubby's, who built a lot of their initial brand on Facebook advertising, it gets harder and harder and harder to get any kind of organic traffic, because basically everything, Facebook has gotten better and better and better at figuring out how to make you pay to get access to audience. So the one quick answer is you're, I think, doing the exact right thing, which is to worry about this. And my suggestion is that you probably need to begin shifting your focus away from YouTube, even if it's at the expense of short-term revenue, and recognize that you're in you are the boiled frog here, that the longer you wait, the harder it is to escape. I understand that YouTube is making some efforts to be more gracious in compensating its creators. Have you had a chance to be part of that? Is that a program that you qualify for?
I haven't heard that.
Yeah, I thought they were one of the ones who was also forming a creators fund, but maybe I'm missing out on that. Maybe I'm mistaking that for a different platform. So, what do you think would happen if you began to double down? For example, let me back up. For the content that you place on your own website under a paywall, behind a paywall, how different is that content?
In the past, it's been maybe behind the scenes content, so updates. But I would like to move into content that has a similar sort of vibe or aesthetic as content that is available for free, but more detached from what is available for free. So like original series and whatnot.
What would happen if you tried that? I guess the scary part, let me put words in your mouth, is that basically you're putting something out every 2 weeks. You are relying on that boost of revenue that you get from putting that out onto YouTube. And if you take something that you were planning on putting onto YouTube in general and put it behind the paywall, and it gets 10% of the views it would, or in other words, it generates way, way less revenue, that hurts a lot. Is that probably what you're going, ugh, I don't know about doing that?
Yes.
Well, so, perhaps this is just one of those questions of courage where you have to find something to see what you can possibly do. I mean, listen, one option, and this is always the case, is you do nothing. And you say, you become like a company with highly seasonal revenue, and you go, I just have to get used to the fact that it's going to fluctuate all the time, and I'll just keep creating great content. Hopefully the numbers will get bigger and bigger, and I have to accept the fact that some of them get hits for reasons beyond my control, and some of them are not hits for reasons beyond my control. And I build a structure of business which can handle that. The other one is you need to be simultaneously building the lifeboat while you're sailing the ship. And it certainly warrants beginning to put increasing focus on what needs to happen to get you to a better place. And begin to think about, how do you do your own self-promotion? Okay, let's just take a hypothetical here. All right, I'll give you two hypotheticals, because now I'm kind of getting a sense of this. So, you do have to double down and create one extra piece of content. So in 1 month you do 3 of them, purely so you have something great you can put behind the paywall and begin playing with. And the first thing you find out is when it's real content behind the paywall, not just behind the scenes or deleted scenes or whatever, interviews, whatever else you're normally putting there. But when it's really the premier content behind the paywall, what happens? What does the ratio of views have to be to get you to a break-even scenario? And that's just your starting point. Because listen, if you're incredibly lucky, you go, oh my gosh, what I get paid per 1,000 views by Google, I can make that by getting 1 out of every 10,000 people to watch it behind the paywall. But I don't know what the arithmetic is. But the first step in this formula is saying, what does that ratio look like when I have real content there rather than behind the scenes content there? But I think the really interesting part is when you begin to say, how do I build this freemium model? How do I begin using this content I do continue to put out on the free YouTube? Because I wouldn't stop that. You have a lot of followers. That's a tremendous asset. But your now question is, how do I use this asset to begin building my rainy day fund? How do I begin using this to drive traffic from this place where the revenue is in someone else's hands into the revenue which is in my hands? So for example, this is going to sound stupid because I am not a short content producer. So don't take these as literal, but this is for example. In other words, you put a commercial at the middle of your 7-minute film. Never mind, that's crazy. But you put one at the beginning. You do trailers. You do a trailer at the beginning. You do a trailer at the end for this piece of content which is behind the paywall. You begin figuring out other ways that you can use your YouTube channel to promote what's behind the paywall, but not promoting the behind the scenes for something that someone has to have watched first, but basically trying to create some totally different place to find totally different content. And if you don't start, you'll never get there. You may in fact go, A, doesn't work, no one does it. Or it slightly works, and no matter what I do, I can't seem to drive my numbers up enough to make it work. Fine, it may not work. But you've got to start trying some stuff if you do want to begin generating this number. Oh, great. Now I got some other things to talk about. The other thing that I was going to mention is if you're limited in how much that you can create, maybe you could use your asset to help promote other people's content. Perhaps you begin building your own mini channel. You begin bringing other creators who go out onto your YouTube channel. You begin putting them behind your paywall. You begin saying, I can't create enough myself to make it economically viable, but maybe I can promote other people's at some different type of revenue share to make it viable. Again, I don't know the details, just ways to think about how to begin shifting your revenue stream from one to the other. The last thing I'll say, I think, is in all of this, what I salute you for is the fact that you recognize this is not a long-term viable situation to be in. Or put it this way, that you're concerned about this being this long-term scenario. So it's fantastic you've all of a sudden begun to think about where do I go next. And what I was going to say is that the biggest advice you can give someone in that scenario is that if you don't know exactly what you want, the odds of you getting there are pretty slim. And what usually helps is to give yourself a primary metric which you look at every month. And I would imagine that right now your primary metric is probably views, or it's probably monetizable views, and I'm not sure what the other metrics that YouTube gives you that you can drive toward. But I think a great metric for you to start using would be what percentage of your revenue is coming from the online, from the primary channel versus your secondary channels. And set yourself this goal over the next 12 months to say, I want to go up 2% per month for the next 12 months, which means you're going to go from 15 to, what would that be, 39% of your revenue coming from non-Google AdWord supported or Google Ad supported revenue. And which will make you begin to allocate certain cycles of your day toward brainstorming, what can I do this month to begin pushing a slightly more percentage of revenue over to my non-YouTube channels. It'll just help you, I think, focus that it's a critical piece that you need to get right. And it'll be simultaneously pushing you to say, how can I come up with better products to sell? How can I be more clever about my brand integrations so that I can begin to charge more for them? But I intuitively think that the way that you're going to really escape this trap is by building Jack TV or Jack Tube or whatever you're internally going to refer to it as, rather than having all your content be under someone else's monetization control.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
I don't know if that makes sense. I don't know if it. Hope it's helpful. It's you're in a complicated business, but you have the most important ingredients, which is you have the creative talent. Clearly, you have the capabilities to do this. You have a following, and probably the most important thing is you've realized I have to do something about this so I don't become the boiled frog. I'm friends with a few social media content stars who have very, very big followings, and realized not long ago, acknowledged, probably is a better word for it, that the half-life of a social media influencer star is very, very short. And that they had better begin thinking about how they're going to diversify their income, how they're going to begin to leverage their talent and success in this one narrow, highly capricious business into other opportunities that may in fact have more longevity, even if it means in the short term stepping away from the thing which at the current moment is the golden goose. And I think that you're probably in a very, very similar situation. You have to simultaneously say, how do I continue to build my business on YouTube, since that's where I've seen the success, but you've got to put the cycles to saying, how do I begin to use that success to move revenue, eyeballs, monetization opportunities to a platform I control? I wish you could hear some of my conversations with my own team who helps me with a lot of what I do, where I'm pushing us to do things which seem old-fashioned, which is, don't laugh, but, building an email list, capturing people's emails who are people who are interested in what I have to say. Because even though I can get followers on the social media platforms, I'll never own that asset. The only asset that I can really own is my website traffic and my email list. And I'm willing to sacrifice doing a suboptimal job on the social media side of it in favor of being able to build the asset which I actually can own. And I think it's at a much smaller scale than what you're talking about. And I'm fortunate in that, thank God, I don't need to make a living on my social media efforts, since that would be pathetic. But I'm doing the same thing. And it probably is, I think you're doing the right thing too. Just do it harder.
Yeah, right on. I think another angle. Oh, can I ask another question? Is that all right?
No, please. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, right on. Yeah, I think another angle that kind of is one, a motivator, but two, is definitely a different angle that I am just recently having to navigate, in that I had a co-founder previously, and the relationship wasn't working out, so I purchased back those shares. So I'm currently on a monthly or a quarterly payment plan to buy back those shares completely. And so at the moment, I'm able to meet those payments per quarter. But my questioning comes how I would navigate maybe taking an initial hit in the beginning to build a secondary revenue source offsite, and still be able to meet those payments, versus like reinvesting the extra cash back into content.
I totally hear you. And it's the first thing I'll do is I'll acknowledge that it's easy to say, be prepared to sacrifice your present to do the right thing in the future. But for you, being able to sacrifice current revenue to invest in what the future might be is especially difficult because you have obligations. And it's the same thing about, having someone walk away from their something when they have car payments and mortgages. And I recognize the risk threshold goes way, way, way up. So I don't want to be superficial and say, oh, just do it, because I recognize that's not easy. I think in this scenario, it may require, to the degree that you're still on reasonably decent terms with this person, is see if they're willing to acknowledge the value of what you're doing, which means that it could be some sort of circumstance where you say, for whatever you're willing to short-term forego now, it could be 20% more if you're willing to wait a year while this happens, or some way of structuring it so that in the event, if this person is patient with the repayment or is willing to accept the fact that you'll pay out of a different stream when that stream comes online, and you can do so perhaps a bit better and make it worth their while to wait, it may require some creative negotiation. And the other one could be, and I'm willing to acknowledge this, that because of how much of your cash flow this repayment plan requires, that you can't do it or you certainly can't do it in a way that risks revenue until you've gotten through the repayment. Quite frankly, I don't see any other way around that. I guess the third one is you go, okay, well, you're going to have to figure out how to do this without being willing to take the step back from your current scenario. And maybe you can do that. Maybe all you can really do is say, I can't afford to not use every piece of long-form content that I have as part of the primary offering. And so all I can continue to do is offer the behind-the-scenes footage. I'm just going to have to figure out a way to be more clever about how I promote that. Now my metric becomes what percentage of the people who viewed the original chose to subscribe to the secondary one. What can I do to promote that availability more extensively, et cetera. And so I acknowledge it's a reality, and you'll have to figure out some way to dance around it. I don't think it takes you off the hook entirely, especially if you're on the hook for this person for years and years and years. Then you're just going to you'll go down the tubes trying to make all the no pun intended, trying to make payments to your ex-partner. A tough one. Don't give up though. There's a way through. There always is.
Yeah, it's like it's fun though. Throws a rocket into it. It's like a video game. Figure it out.
It is. Unfortunately, you're on level 36, and so you've gotten a long way, a lot further than most people. You're getting into the bonus rounds now, so hang in there. I think it's interesting. Jack. I think that the problems that come with having achieved some level of success and now saying, how do I optimize for this, are wonderful problems to have. The fact that you even have revenue at all that fluctuates puts you in a category which most YouTube content creators would kill for. And so what you do now is just going to put you into an even higher tier if you can figure out some way to begin saying, how do I give myself some time, a couple years, to begin moving a larger percentage of my revenue off of YouTube. And of course, the advantage, which even more dramatic, besides just this long-term self-protection, is hopefully it'll be considerably more regular, especially if your paywall protected content is subscription, meaning that that revenue comes in month after month after month at a relatively stable rate. And we could talk at some point for a long time about the benefits of how to manage a subscription business, but sounds like you're already kind of starting on that one as well. Well, Jack, I'm going to let you go. I think you've got some thinking to do, as they say. But I do think you'll get this one figured out. Lots of people are struggling with this. I wouldn't be surprised if it's sometime soon someone does. In fact, we might even hear about it if someone knows about one, feel free to leave it in the comments on the website of a platform that in fact does offer a back-end system for being able to manage subscription video. It sounds like there's a need for it, and I hope that you get successful in building out what you're working on.
Thank you so much, Mark. It's been really cool to hear your insights. Appreciate it.
Well, good luck. And I'll ask you one last thing, which is that let's check back in I don't know, 6 or 9 months. I'm curious to see if any of this ends up resonating and if you're able to make any progress, perhaps doing something completely different. But most importantly, good luck, and we'll be in touch.
Sounds great. Thanks.